Hello, my name is Claudia Pinto Ribeiro and I'm from the University of Porto, and I'm here to talk about the design of learning activities, historical thinking and reasoning with digital sources. The Internet offers a rich variety of historical sources such as images, documents, documentaries, information about heritage sites or museum objects. Such sources can be used well to allow students to investigate the past and form an image and opinion about it. In this guide, we explain how you can develop activities in which students investigate digital sources and engage in historical inquiry and historical thinking and reasoning. In inquiry tasks, students can build their own historical interpretations or arguments using evidence from historical sources. These tasks typically have an open-ended historical question, use multiple information sources representing different perspectives on the topic, and require a process of knowledge transformation that synthesizes the information into an argumentative account. Gesdottir and et al. Discussed that what teachers can do to teach historical thinking and reasoning. Teachers can communicate learning objectives related to historical thinking and reasoning, demonstrate historical thinking and reasoning in their own explanation, use historical sources to support historical thinking and reasoning, make clear that there are multiple perspectives and interpretations, provide explicit instruction on historical thinking and reasoning strategies, engage students in historical thinking and reasoning by individual or group tasks or a whole class discussion. We provide guidance on formulating learning objectives focused on historical reasoning, formulating a focus question, selecting digital sources, planning learning activities, and scaffolding historical reasoning. To formulate objectives focused on historical competencies, it is important to have a clear picture of what historical thinking, reasoning, and argumentation entails. In the literature, there are several conceptualizations. Weinberg, for example, distinguished three historical thinking heuristics to evaluate historical sources: sourcing, contextualization, and corroboration. Others identified second-order or historical thinking concepts and related strategies, such as identifying aspects of change and continuity, historical empathy, and attributing historical significance. Wiesinger and De La Paz and Montesano et al. Defined historical argumentation, making a case for a particular interpretation in which examples and details from historical sources are used to substantiate claims. Figure 1 presents an integrative framework defining types, components, and resources of historical reasoning. Historical reasoning attempts to reach justifiable conclusions about process of continuity and change, causes and consequences, and or differences and similarities between historical phenomena or periods. These conclusions are developed through the analysis and critical evaluation of available historical interpretations of primary sources. Learning objectives can be focused on different types or components of reasoning or on particular historical second-order concepts. For example, explain the effects of war propaganda on people. Explain with examples that the causes of popular revolts are usually a mixture of factors that from the political, socio-economic, and cultural mental domain. used the concept of enlightenment to explain what changed in the way punishment was administered in the early 19th century, identify aspects of change and continuity in how vagrants were punished since the Middle Ages. The focus can also be on historical argumentation, including attention for the ethical dimension of history. For example, formulate an ethical judgment about changes in the treatment of vagrants, homeless people, using historical arguments and moral values. Learning goals need to be developed in relation to the focus question for the inquiry-based learning task. A good inquiry question is an open-ended question that asks for a claim that is supported by evidence and reasoning. The question can focus on practicing a particular form of reasoning, such as reasoning about change and continuity or causes. For example, what changed in the way of punishing? Or why did peasants revolt? When you want to emphasize historical argumentation, you can work with an evaluative question or claims that students need to respond to. For example, is propaganda another way of war? Punishment has become more human? Or explain that throughout history there is no such thing as the vagrant or homeless person. Disciplinary questions are not necessarily meaningful for students. In order to make inquiring meaningful for students, one can choose questions related to enduring human issues, such as justice and injustice, equality and inequality, or persistent social problems such as discrimination or crime. Other ways to motivate students are focusing on experiences of ordinary and marginalized people, connecting past and present, and asking for ethical judgment so that students can develop their own opinions and ideals. For example, how did the authorities in the 19th and the 20th century deal with vagrants, homeless people, and what do you think of the measures taken? The Internet offers a wealth of historical sources. You can use digital libraries such as History Lab, Europeana, or Gale primary sources. There are also collections focusing on a particular type of sources, such as history collections, oral history collections, for example, Voices of the Holocaust or Eyewitness. Websites of museums and archives give access to historical objects, images, documents, and multimedia representations related to historical periods and themes. Furthermore, the Internet provides access to documentaries and podcasts. Especially when looking for sources that relate to a very specific topic, scientific articles or book chapters by specialized historians are useful. These often contain excerpts from historical documents, historical images, maps, and tables. There are several considerations when choosing appropriate sources. First, sources must provide information that really fit the focus question. Second, sources with details about concrete persons and actions support historical imagination and interest. Third, understanding historical sources requires historical contextualization. A textbook text, documentary, or self-written summary may be helpful to provide students with background information. Fourth, one has to be aware that sources are likely to include only the perspectives of those in power. Therefore, you should always check whether the chosen sources do justice to different experiences and perspectives. Students only learn from inquiry-based learning activities when they are adequately supported, tailored to what they need. Instructional support can consist of scaffolds, for example, cues, hints, prompts, examples, which can be removed or omitted if students have enough prior knowledge or mastered a particular competency. When designing a learning activity, appropriate scaffolds can be considered. An inquiry task can be broken down in manageable sub-questions. But don't structure too much, because students need some autonomy to become or stay motivated and must have the opportunity to think for themselves about appropriate approaches. The teacher can also give explicit instruction about historical thinking or reasoning heuristic strategy. For example, about how to construct an explanation, criteria that can be used to attribute historical significance, or how to critically evaluate the trustworthiness of sources. This can be done by modeling or using examples. When students analyze multiple sources to answer a given question, pre-writing organizers might be helpful to organize information, such as causal maps, Venn diagrams, or matrices. Finally, teachers can inform students about the assessment criteria. For example, criteria used to evaluate the quality of a written historical argument. When planning learning activities, you have to consider the types of activities activities students will need to engage in order to develop the competencies and knowledge aimed at. Constructive alignment is the key to a coherent activity or lesson. Learning activities should be directly related to the learning objectives and provide experiences that will enable students to engage in, practice, and gain feedback on progress towards those objectives. Think about a starter to introduce the focus question and learning goals and to obtain students' attention. For example, using an image, story, or news item that raises questions, disbelief, indignation, or curiosity. Also take sufficient time for closure. This can be done by a whole class discussion in which students share their findings or arguments, or by formative assessment techniques. Both formative and summative assessments should align with learning objectives and activities. As you plan learning activities, estimate how much time you will spend on each and take into account the time needed for explanation or discussion. A template can be helpful to outline a program for a historical reasoning activity or inquiry-based lesson. With successful design learning activities, students can develop their own historical interpretations and arguments, explore multiple perspectives using digital sources, and engage in historical thinking, reasoning, argumentation, and ethical judgment. Thank you so much for your attention.